I'm Dodd Russell, CEO of Skilled Manufacturing. We're a global company based here in Traverse City, and for the past 30 years we've been supplying the automotive industry with quality, high-tolerance components and assembly. We take pride in our ability to quickly adapt and innovate in this ever-evolving technology-driven industry. As we shift gears from making ventilator parts back to automotive powertrain solutions, our talented team of engineers demand excellence in design and manufacturing quality. Whether we are creating a single custom prototype or a run of 500,000 components, we are committed to achieving excellence one part at a time. We hope to see the Center for Automotive Research back in Traverse City in 2021. Until then, drive safely and stay healthy.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us in the Smart Cities Collaboration Playbook session at CAR MBS 2020. During the session, all audience members will be muted to ensure a quality user experience for everyone participating. Please submit your questions by using the Q&A function. If you have any other questions regarding the virtual MBS experience, please feel free to ask those questions at the information desk in the virtual lobby. Please also take a moment to visit the virtual exhibits in the exhibit hall. And if you'd like to earn CEU or PDH credits for participating in CAR MBS, please visit our MBS page on our website at www.cargroup.org to access the registration link for CEUs or PDHs. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to welcome session moderator, President and CEO at the Center for Automotive Research, Carla Balow.
Hello, thank you, Katie, for great housekeeping of every session today, and welcome to the session on Smart Cities Collaboration Playbook. There are three excellent panelists in this session from New York City, City of Montreal, and City of Peachtree Corners. I'm going to introduce each speaker, each panelist, and then allow them to give their thoughts for a few minutes or provide a presentation. And then I'll move to each subsequent panelist. And after that, we'll have Q&A. So our first panelist is Mark Dowd. He's the Chief Innovation Officer for New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority. He joined in this role in November 2019. And in this role, he's leading several technology initiatives, including the application of ultra-wideband to subways and the development of a New York regional transportation as a service model. He's deeply involved in spearheading innovation approaches to the COVID crisis in New York, including the help with social distancing, application of ultraviolet light to kill the virus that causes COVID, running the COVID challenge, and standing up a for-hire vehicle program in 5 days to provide essential workers with transportation during the shutdown of subway service from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Prior to joining MTA, he's the founder and executive director of Smart Cities Lab, a city-facing nonprofit providing policy support and a venue for cities to share what works, what doesn't work, in a challenging funding environment. Prior to that, he was in many roles in government in the Obama administration and prior to that, and I know him best as the father of the US Smart City Challenge. So I'd like to give the floor to Mark for his opening comments on this subject.
Thank you, Carla. Appreciate the introduction. Hello from New York City. We, in addition to COVID, right now we have a tropical storm heading our way to add a little bit more joy in our life. Coming to the MTA, which is the largest transit agency in North America, we have kind of had two jobs, right? I had my job that from November to the end of February, where we worked hard on bringing different technologies into the transit world, because transit generally has not been a place where a lot of these new innovations that are in automotive, that are in aviation and elsewhere, those types of innovations haven't disrupted the transit agency world very much. And trying to bring some of those technologies into that space, like ultra-wideband or UWB, which is a communication tool for positioning and navigation, bringing in LiDAR, HD mapping, et cetera, into our space. And then also trying to bring a different approach to data and how we communicate with our customers. And most important, and to me, this is one of the reasons why I did come to the MTA, is their focus on changing the relationship with their customer. And so relationship generally with transit agencies with their customer is one in a closed loop system, right? That you come in, you have your Metro card and you swipe and you come into my system. And that's my relationship with you, is you use my proprietary card, the payment system's closed loop. And there's not a retail type of relationship with the customer. And so I'm excited to be working at MTA because we have a system called Omni. We poured $600 million into the system. It's a payment system. It allows for us to then have a relationship with our customers that are retail based, and they can have basically use their credit card to come into the system with a tap on our system. And that revolutionizes, from our perspective, our relationship with our customer, and we no longer are dependent on a closed loop system, but an open loop. And then COVID hit, and it's a whole nother job. And that job, particularly in New York, was existential, with losing over 130 of our colleagues to COVID, who were in service as essential workers, driving people in buses, driving people in trains, and working in the system. That brings a focus, as it were, to innovation and the need for quick innovation. And the thing that was fascinating to me is that our agency was amazing in how quickly we responded and how quickly we worked to try to solve some of the very difficult problems you have in a transit situation or in any type of shared use system with COVID. So with that, I'm looking forward to engaging with my colleagues on this panel, particularly talking a little bit more about transportation as a service and some of the issues that I think that we've learned in both from the COVID perspective and from the payment perspective here at MTA.
Thank you, Mark. Just a little side note, I got a picture from my daughter's house in Washington, D.C. with her total backyard totally underwater. So be prepared. Maybe it'll lose a little intensity by the time it works its way up the coast.
Sure.
I'm pleased to introduce the second speaker of today. Stéphane Guedouin is the director of the Montreal Urban Innovation Lab. Since June 2017, he's been working on the transformation of the Smart and Digital City Office into the Urban Innovation Lab. He's piloted many projects, including the candidacy of the City of Montreal to the Smart Cities Challenge of Canada, which I'm pleased to say the City of Montreal won the first prize of $50 million. Previously, he was responsible for the open data file for the City of Montreal. It has defined and adopted new guidelines for open data and data governance, leading to a default opening policy. Please go ahead with your opening remarks, Stéphane.
Hello, and thank you, Carla. So following what I've been doing in the past, I will discuss a little bit about data. In Montreal, what we are trying to do in the last years is developing some new data collaboration to support the future of mobility. I'll just give 3 brief examples of what we are trying to do and what the challenges that we're facing, and then we could discuss a little more about how we can move forward between local government, other governments, and private companies. Well, first thing, we've done some testing around autonomous vehicles, and well, the testing went well, but it was clear for us that autonomous vehicles have a high data potential, but clearly nobody really thought about it. There is no real understanding, and those vehicles are collecting lots of data specifically around mobility, but they're also collecting data about the public space, which could be very interesting. Mainly, they are collecting some LiDAR data for some of them. The operators of those vehicles do not see themselves as data brokers. And the manufacturers are hesitant to share data because they tend to consider that as a competitive advantage. But on the other hand, we see the data being collected by those vehicles as part of the value proposition of autonomous vehicles. And what we've seen is that everything has to be done to see how we collect those data. And I have to say that we see autonomous vehicles as a sandbox that eventually could develop some data sharing and data collaboration that could be retrofitted to other types of vehicles that are also collecting data, like regular buses in the city. So we really see this as missed opportunities, and I'm really pleased to try to open the discussion with lots of partners to say, okay, how can we share data around mobility, and how can we reach for various opportunities? And that's one of the things that we are doing, part of the Smart City Challenge. So as Carla said, we've won it and we are starting the work. And one of the things that we are working currently is to develop a data trust on mobility, which is basically a technological data hub, but also all the governance that goes around to see how we can share and how we can design a value proposition for everybody. The idea for this data trust is really to be the support of the mobility as a service governance. So really, everybody around the table that's willing to be part of the mobility as a service project, part of the Smart City Challenge, is saying that we would take much more better decision with more data. At the same time, everybody says, yeah, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to share them. I don't know what's gonna happen. We don't have a solid enough framework to do the sharing, to extract value from it, but at the same time, make sure that competitive information is not being disclosed. In Montreal, we have an example in the field of culture and events, where all the actors have shared their data for Montreal downtown. And although they are competitors, they've been able to extract value and really have a better understanding of how they are complementing each other's and when they tend to damage each other's. And they have been able to develop strategies that overall make the market bigger and more accessible for everybody. So our view on mobility data is basically the same. We know that lots of people see themselves as competitor, but at the same time, from the point of view of the user, they are supposed to be complementing each other's. So we really see data as the glue and the way to see what's the value proposition for everybody and how we make a better proposition for travelers.
Thank you, Stefan. And I look forward to talking about what perhaps the differences are between data sharing, data ownership between Canada and the US and see what we can learn from each other.
Sure.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce the third panelist today, who's Brian Johnson, the city manager of Peachtree Corners. And as the city manager, he's the CEO of the city and responsible for the management of all city departments and of all city affairs. He's currently one of only about 1,400 local government management professionals worldwide to have earned the prestigious credentialed manager designation from the International City County Management Association. During his current tenure, Peachtree Corners has gained international attention for its construction of the Curiosity Lab of Peachtree Corners, a city-owned and operated 1.5-mile autonomous vehicle test track and smart city living laboratory. He's presented this concept nationally and internationally and provided advisory assistance to cities who are considering similar projects. His professional career actually began in the military, where he served as both a cryptologist in the US Navy and as an infantry officer in the US Army. Previously served as a city manager of Garden City, Georgia, and most recently Anniston, Alabama. So without Further, oh, I do need to add one more thing. He's a Georgia Trend 40 under 40 Best and Brightest honoree and a 2-time recipient of the Bronze Star Medal for Valor. So it's wonderful to have you on this panel. And I'll hand the floor over to you to tell us the great work that's being done in Peachtree Corners.
Thanks, Carla. Thanks for having me. So sometimes the pictures are worth 1,000 words. And so I have a brief PowerPoint presentation. Can you see that presentation? Are we good?
Yes, it's working fine.
All right, so real quick, wanted to just tell everybody what Curiosity Lab is. Real quick, before we start, Peachtree Corners, a lot of people haven't heard of it, but everybody's heard of Atlanta. We're part of the metro Atlanta area. And why the city decided to get into something like this is that last bullet there is we're the second largest municipality in the state with no city property tax. So people are like, wow, no city property tax collected. How do you do it? Well, we have to get creative. And one of the ways we got creative is deciding to get involved in Curiosity Lab. Now, what is Curiosity Lab? Ultimately, when I say it, it's really 3 significant things. It is a 1.5 mile linear laboratory, which forms a 3 mile track for autonomous and advanced vehicles, vehicle testing and demonstration. We also have a bunch of technology that I'll talk about in a second within this linear living laboratory to assist in all sorts of vehicle and mobility testing. And then we also have a 25,000 square foot innovation center that allows for users of this facility to do everything from set up their kind of base of operations to even collecting a lot of the data that Stefan was referring to here earlier. So how we use this is ultimately what the city decided to do is it decided to fill what we saw was a gap in the evolution of technology. We noticed that technology was initially or is initially tested in a closed controlled environment. So that way you can isolate all the variables, you can decide whether your technology works or not. But at a certain point, some of the technology graduates from that closed environment. And where does it go from there? And we noticed that there wasn't this place that had been constructed specifically to have that technology be, call it, gently integrated into the real world where there are humans. And as given that there are humans, there's all sorts of unknowns and variables thrown into the mix. And you don't want to go from closed laboratory to downtown, New York City or Montreal overnight. There needs to be oftentimes a transition. And so what we decided to do is create that walk phase of the crawl, walk, run. And so when you are done crawling in the closed environment, you can walk at our living laboratory. And then if you can graduate from here, then you should be ready for the larger urban environment. So what we've done is we put a bunch of technology into our laboratory to test everything from all the V2X stuff, DSRC, roadside units. We have a 5G wireless infrastructure here. We've got traffic signals that can communicate with the traffic. We've got edge computing, video cameras on our light poles. So we basically created the city street of the future where everything can talk to everything else. And then we turned it over and we told the private sector, hey, come play in our sandbox, play with our toys, do it for free, and you win because you get to use all these assets to further your research and testing goals. We win because we get activity. And it's as easy as if somebody's just here for one day, they're still going to get hungry at lunch and they're going to probably eat in our restaurants. If they're only here a couple days, they're going to probably stay in our hotels, so on and so forth. So we created this Curiosity Lab, and some of the uses we've got Oh, one last thing is we also, we can talk about this later, but to Stefan's point on data is a very, very important part of all this testing. And we have created an operations center in which all of these scenarios that anybody could create to test and collect all the data can be done at one location, which actually helps in the COVID environment because you don't always have to go out and interact with people. We can put you in that room. You can do it all at one location. But since we've opened up, here's just in the last 6 months, some of the users we've had. We had the very first deployment of a fully autonomous shuttle on a public street interacting with human-driven automobiles when Local Motors deployed their Ollie shuttle here on our facility. You can see, you know, the interaction there between the other automobiles. Then we've had the very first deployment of teleoperated e-scooters. Those are scooters that when a human is not on them, another human at a remote location, in this case, Mexico City, can drive around those e-scooters and reposition them, declutter them, drive them to docking station or disinfecting station, as the case may be in the COVID environment. And so this might be a way for e-scooters to get deployed in the urban environment, redeployed in the urban environment, not create some of the safety issues that they've created in the past with that clutter, but we've deployed that. We have a solar roadway going in right now in which the roadway is linked to electric vehicle charging stations such that real world electric vehicles can drive to a charging station over the very solar road that's generating power for those charging stations. And those are residents and business employees of this area. Our laboratory exists within a 500-acre technology park that has over 800 jobs and over 1,000 people that reside, 8,000 jobs and over 1,000 people reside here in this tech park. So it's a real working one. We've had autonomous drone package and food delivery operations going on with these real businesses. So at the end of the day, I'll close by saying Curiosity Labs benefit to those out there in the community who want to do something in mobility or smart city. Our facility offers free 5G and free use of the facility, so it's not a pay to play. The city is the only governmental entity that you actually have to get permission to use because we own and regulate the entire thing, so you don't need to get the state or the feds or anybody else involved. We do not require intellectual property ownership of anything created here, and we also can protect proprietary information. And one last thing is we are actually insured. A public street here is insured for both driven and driverless vehicles on the same roadway together. And there's general liability insurance for that. So we were able to secure that. Here's some of the partners. This is oftentimes one of the best way to know that your project is good is when you got big companies that are prepared to put their fingerprints on it. So with that, I'll close and look forward to participating with the esteemed panelists on here, on any questions or comments people have about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. One thing that I just wanted to remind the panelists, when we're going through the Q&A, I will address a question to a particular person, but then please feel free, to hop in and ask your own question or add a comment as well. Brian, one question I had for you, and I didn't ask it previously, but as I was watching your presentation, you mentioned, as an enabler of innovation. And we often hear so many times with startups or with universities that there are so many great ideas that are, just not commercializable yet, but need to have a way to become commercialized. And they enter this valley of death and we never hear about them again. So it seems that your Curiosity Lab provides a place for these innovators to come and get through that valley of death. Is that true? Would you say that?
We would like to think so. I think at the end of the day, what we have hoped to do is we made it clear that all we are doing is creating an environment so that you don't get lost in the valley of death. So by that, I mean, it's a very low cost option. So cost doesn't drive somebody to where they can't do something. We have all these other partners who have made contributions and have oftentimes permanent permanent residency in our innovation center here to look at partnering with and helping perpetuate some of this technology. 3, some of those points I just made about companies coming in and they might be afraid that their information becomes part of somebody else's intellectual property, or, it's not proprietary anymore. We can protect all of that. And then the last thing is maybe this is why we feel like this is a strong move, and that is we have made the public infrastructure, and by that I mean roads, sidewalks, water, sewer, power, all that stuff. We're the only ones that can regulate public, infrastructure. And when we turn it over to the private sector to use our infrastructure for their purposes, not ours, it oftentimes makes one of those huge hurdles for a company that's wanting to, let the real world know what they're doing. It gives them an opportunity to do it inexpensively. The last thing I'll say is our partnerships oftentimes are helpful too. CNN is headquartered here in Atlanta, so we have a great relationship with them. So oftentimes when we get good technology, we'll give a call down to CNN and say, hey, you may want to come up here and take a look at this. This is pretty unique. And like teleoperated e-scooters, and they came up here and they're like, you're right. So those are some of the ways, like you said, to try to keep some of these companies out of that, the abyss, and help them go. And we don't get anything out of it other than we've maybe had our part in helping further some technology that may make our world a little bit better of a place.
Yeah, that's fabulous. There are so many innovative ideas that just don't have any place to go ahead and go through the validation process. I want to make everybody aware that's watching and the other panelists know, I shouldn't have mentioned anything to Mark about the storm headed his way because he's now lost electricity and he's trying to find a workaround to be able to rejoin us. So hopefully he can do something cellular related, and otherwise we'll just carry on. Oh, it looks like we've got him back. I have a question about public policy, and Brian, I'll start with you and then I'll move to Stefan. And Mark, good to see you in the dark or in the shadows.
I'm just legitimately in a storm right now.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said anything. I just mentioned that to the rest of the audience. Were there any public policy hurdles that you had to overcome or establish, Brian, when you created the Curiosity Lab? And I'm curious then, in Montreal's case and then in New York City's case, what are some of the hurdles from a public policy standpoint that you've encountered, and perhaps some that you've overcome in a creative way? So we'll start with Brian.
Well, we certainly have our fair share of it. And I'll start by saying, of course, as a government, we're in a unique position because we're the creator of a lot of the public policy that applies to this in some cases. And since we own the entire, infrastructure and real estate that's being used for this laboratory environment, we're in a unique position. Now, that being said, there are a lot of hurdles that sometimes are beyond our pay grade. For instance, drone activity above 400 feet, we got to get into the FAA. There are driverless shuttles that do not meet the U.S. Guidelines for a defined automobile, like locomotors. We have to get some others. And then maybe one good one that I can segue into Stefan is, data. We recently certified Curiosity Lab with, it's a NIST certified data facility. And because there's a lot of data that when you have international companies, and we have actually Canadian companies down here, and we have a good relationship with Canada, especially the province of Quebec, and Israel, that we've got to have data sharing or data protection and management policies that exceed our local. So there's always regulations, and you just do the best that you can to try to deregulate as much as possible to kind of part that Red Sea and help these companies navigate through it.
Stefan?
Yes, it's basically the same. So in Quebec and Canada, we have basically the same structure with the federal government, local government, which are provinces and not state, but the idea is the same. For autonomous vehicle, for example, on our side, it's mainly regulated by the province. So we had to do lots of work to make sure that we could get authorization. The way to overcome that is really collaboration and bringing the staff from the provincial government on board with us and be really open about what we are doing. And on the data side, I would even go the opposite side as Brian, which is maybe sometimes we need more regulation in the sense that what's lacking currently in many parts of the world and mainly in the US and Canada is a good infrastructure, a good policies to make people feel comfortable about the data that are being transmitted about themselves. So how data are being used. The GDPR in Europe is maybe too high in terms of constraints, but somehow we have to emulate our own set of policies. We are writing a data charter just to say, here is what we allow ourselves to do. It's a bit what San Francisco did when they banned facial recognition. It's really being able to set the stage so that people are comfortable about the data that we are doing, because we feel lots of anxiety around data sharing and what organization will do with data. So there is sometimes too much policies and too much regulation, and sometimes there isn't even not enough, and we have to bring something where there will be trust and people will be confident that we don't overdo and we don't completely forget some citizen rights.
Thank you, Stefan. And Mark, when we think about public policy, I mean, before the pandemic happened, there was already some policies that had been introduced to limit Uber and Lyft, et cetera, in certain areas of New York City. Are there more policies planned, or things that you're thinking about to help with the movement about the city?
Sure. So I think that one of the interesting things to me is, as much as public agencies want to collaborate with each other and cooperate with each other on a regular basis, the need to do so is not always obvious, right? There'll be particular issues like Stefan was talking about with regard to data, and you need to collaborate and work together on that, because I think if you stand there and think as a public agency, you're going to be able to withstand various different technology companies coming to you and cycling through data sharing agreements, and you're going to win out of that situation. You're not going to. And being able to unionize or collectively bargain through those data sharing agreements, I think is really important. With regard to car sharing, and the New York City still has in place that for Uber and Lyft, that you can't take more than one person in your car unless they're family or they live together. So I think that it is. I think it's a very difficult event right now from a car sharing perspective, and I think it is a very difficult environment look. I don't want, like, people of means, with their kids in school or not in school, getting to and from work, having technology like, hey, my power went out and I was able to quickly get my hotspot, put it back on, get back on, and stuff like that. You know what? These options aren't available to everyone as they're going through. So for me, that the fact that we're in this crisis together, regardless, I think forces public agencies to collaborate out of necessity instead of out of interest. And that's certainly what's happened in New York City. Our collaboration with our colleagues at New York City DOT, at Port Authority, at Amtrak, at New Jersey Transit is weekly. We engage weekly. We share resources weekly. We find something that works. We let each other know on the data side, on the COVID side. And that, to me, that piece makes me happy, right? And to me, it hopefully will form a basis to help people like Stefan out in how to look at this and how to get Brian's learnings out into a different space, right? And it's hard because I know for sure for me, and you know, Carla, because we met each other this way, like my head was up looking around the country, trying to understand what different cities are going through, what different transit agencies are going through. I got to MTA, head down, focused on trying to solve the issues that are in front of me. COVID hit, head down, even with regard to my friends and family, like it's head down. And so the things that bring our head up and look around and collaborate together, to me, that's if we can find a silver lining with COVID, that is one of the silver linings, at least for us at MTA.
I'm going to circle back to that collaboration in a couple of minutes, but I want to ask you now about data. You mentioned in your opening comments about the Omni system. Can you explain a little bit what that is? How, you know, does it interact with all the different ways you can get around the city, kind of a one payment, or and then of course, who owns that data, and how do you convince the customer it's secure?
All right. So one of the difficulties in you know, Brian and Stefan talked a little bit about the data sharing, data capacity, the payment piece. For me, as transportation system, was the thing that always public agencies stumbled over. Uber and Lyft has that payment system in place. They've spent money on it. They have a very robust ability to verify who you are, to get the payment through, and be more of a retail type of experience. The difficulty with Uber and Lyft is they are a walled garden. So only those within the walled garden are there services that they provide to a person in that transportation space. The difficulty, I think, in a lot of different things, and one of the things that when I talked to all you earlier, when we were preparing for this, Omni allows us now to have that payment backbone. $600 million is a lot of money to spend. We can take advantage of that payment backbone to start building with our sister agencies mobility or transportation as a service. And in that, we will be able to, I think, in a much better parity basis, deal with some of the private sector folks in terms of the data sharing piece. But I am very interested in what Stefan's doing and what Open Mobility Foundation and LADOT is leading in terms of the opportunity for public agencies to come together, maybe push that data away from the public agency into a third party, very much like Stefan's talking about. And then how do we do that? How do we get the resources to do that? And I believe that the federal government, as you know, because that's how I came into this space with you, was with this Smart City Challenge, trying to get the federal government to push resources to allow innovation to happen at the local level, as opposed to dictating how it's supposed to happen, to allow people like Stefan and Brian and myself at the local agency basis to figure out with resources, do we build a third party nonprofit as a way to deal with the data piece? So because if MTA owns all that data coming off Omni and we have a transportation as a service, that's not good. That's not the best way. And so I think that there is an opportunity as we go through this to bring resources from the federal government into this space to allow us to innovate in that space.
Thank you, Mark. And I think he tossed the ball to you, Stefan, in the middle of his talks there. So if you could enlighten us what's happening in Montreal with the data and data management system.
Yeah, so as I said, we are at the very beginning, but the way we envision that, so Mark said that, for example, Uber and the other is a closed garden. So our vision is really around an open garden. So develop, but open garden with privileges, in the sense that part of the governance that we like to develop is basically you can be part of the garden if you're able to show that you have a positive impact on mobility. which means that if we take Uber and car sharing, it's still unclear because data is not always shared as we expect, whether they have a positive impact on congestion or not. One of the key selling points where people will leave their car and they will use Uber and so on from time to time, we have diverging conclusion around that. And what we would like to do, and we will have to see if policy allows us to do it, is basically have a governance where to be part of the garden, you have to share some of the data that allow the ecosystem to check that the impact is positive based on specific target that we give. So for example, on our side, ecological transition is something very important. So we would like to have, for example, some targets to show that it decreases the level of GHG that's being produced. If you're not able to show that impact and demonstrate it based on the data, then it means that you're not bringing value to the system. You're taking value from the system. So that's basically how we want to operate. And the way the intellectual property will be managed, so it's basically a trust. So it means that you have a third party of trust that's being here, that takes the data, and we specify a governance of what the trust by default is able to do in terms of data sharing. And when they want to go beyond that, then they have to get approval from a kind of board, and obviously from the owner of the data. So everybody keeps ownership of the data. There's no question of, I don't know, Uber or the city data ownership being transferred. Everybody remains the owner. It's just that they give permission to the trust to do some specific data analysis and eventually sharing the result of some of those data analysis for the benefit of the ecosystem.
My apologies, I needed to unmute myself. Thank you, Stefan. I'd like to move to Brian to talk a little bit about data. I know there was a question in the Q&A that you already answered about the IP, but how do you use the data from vehicles? And maybe people didn't see your reply, but there's probably a lot of data being generated by the 5G network that you were talking about. How are you handling that, and who eventually owns and uses it, and how do you keep it secure?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Sorry, I had a lot of questions there.
So it's probably important for everyone to understand why we embarked on this to begin with, because you are right. Right now, we are collecting a massive amount of data every day. Now, the reason it's important to notice, so we built this facility for the sole purpose of economic development and activity. So for us, we're not a research institution. We're not necessarily to larger, regional, national, international stuff. We're not an academic institution. We just want activity, because when we have activity, people spend money in the city. That money comes back into our coffers for us to do things. So we're all about the activity. Now, that's why we're okay if somebody keeps intellectual property of something that they've created or invented here. That's helped with our partnerships with academic institutions, because they won't play ball, or it's really difficult to play ball when you are into an IP sharing arrangement. We have a very close relationship with Georgia Tech. It's because we allow them to keep all their intellectual property, or else they wouldn't be playing ball and doing as much research up here. Now, from a data perspective, this is a struggle. And if Stefan has come up with the all-encompassing cure for how to deal with data, I'd love to, talk to him over drinks, because this is going to be a massive problem the more you get into data collecting devices. So we are in a unique position in that this entire 1.5 mile linear laboratory is owned by us. So all the data is being collected through our devices or devices that have been donated to this facility. it is transferred to our network operations center and our storage through a dedicated fiber optic, backbone, and it is segmented from the rest of the city's smart city infrastructure. So it is a segmented, so it's really easy for us to control. However, think about when every street light can talk to every power pole, can talk to every car that has a DSRC unit in it, can talk to every traffic signal. All this stuff is talking to each other, and it's all being collected under a 4G LTE and 5G environment. Just as we're talking, there's massive amounts of data. And so we've had to really struggle, or really not struggle, we've had to really put a lot of effort into data security. Now, I'll close with saying, so the default here is when you decide to come and use our facility, that data is ours. Now, our intention is not necessarily to do anything to monetize it. In fact, I would like to get involved into some data sharing scenarios with other, governments out there, other think tanks or whatever, because we've got a lot of scenarios here that might be useful. But if a company doesn't want their data to be shared, they have to tell us up front. And then what we can do is say, for instance, if we had a company that wanted to do some V2X, like some connected vehicle testing, and they didn't want their competitor to know how good their vehicle, or, their V2X capabilities were, they may not want that public, and we're a public organization. So what we have to do is we create a scenario where all of that data is segmented. And so when they're done with the test, they leave with the data, so that if somebody did an open records request for the data here, we can say we don't have it. But that has to be done up front. Other than that, the rest of it is open, and it's just a matter of organizing it. And again, we've only been open since September of last year. And of course, some of the COVID thing is that, but I'm already sitting on more data through more scenarios that I really know what to do with. So I definitely like to, would love to entertain opportunities to have this data be put to use by other organizations that, are in policy making or research or whatever, and we're not.
Well, thank you, Brian. And by the way, tomorrow night we are hosting a social hour at the end of the conference. So maybe you and Stefan can join and have your little discussion over your own beverage of choice. Mark, I want to come back to you on shared use transit. And of course, this is a good one for Stefan as well. But what's the future? When we look at what's happened with public transit because of COVID, it's decreased significantly. Maybe it started to rebound recently. And what actions are you putting in place into public transit and shared mobility such that the customer can feel confident and safe?
Sure. The feeling safe is a subjective term. And public health is not what transportation folks do, right? So you have to, like when we say safety, we're thinking about crashes and pedestrian safety and things like that. When all of a sudden you have to turn around and look at your system with your business, whether it's your business plan, whatever it is, and safety comes from a health perspective, you get smart quick about what that means. At MTA, we focused immediately on the surfaces. The governor shut down subway service, as you mentioned, from 1 to 5 a.m. First time in 115 years, I think, that we ever shut down when we didn't run 24/7. That wasn't storm related. And the difficulty is how do you then try to de-risk? And that's really what it is. Identify the risks and take those risks out of the commuting process, right? And that innovation space, right? And it really is an innovation space, is a really important place. So you mentioned, like we stood up other cities who went through the same thing where they had to shut down either bus or subway service and essential workers, which were critical to surviving through the COVID crisis. can't get to work, you have to find a way to get them to work. And so then as a transit agency, you're in this awkward space where all of a sudden you're putting out or hiring Uber and Lyft to move those people. For us in New York, we took a different approach. And, look, I talked to my colleagues in Miami, Detroit, and DC about what they did. And they said, hey, we only had 3 or 4 days and we had to, didn't have a choice. And this isn't a business we're in. We turned to Uber and Lyft. We looked at Uber and Lyft, and they didn't have the requirements of having the shield right between the driver and the passengers, and we didn't think that was the right way to go. And our TLC local companies did have that capacity, so we did that. So you have to make choices. With regard to aerosols, which is really where a lot of the effort is in, how do you de-risk that environment for your customer? And that's and you quickly get to a place where you realize people don't know. They've been still trying to figure out how the flu is transmitted, and they don't have that fully figured out. So how are we going to take a new disease and try to figure out how that's transmitted? So all you do is you make assumptions based on what public health people tell you in terms of, the reason why social distancing is droplets, not aerosols, right? Droplets, trying to keep droplets from impacting you and you being contaminated with droplets with SARS-CoV-2. And the second piece is how do you then, so the surfaces are pretty straightforward, right? There's a lot of claims for permanent solutions. There are no permanent solutions currently that are safe for passengers to keep surfaces clean at all times. Mask compliance, we have found in New York to be, I think it's because we went through such a hard time and lost a lot of colleagues and friends, that we have pretty good mask compliance on our subways and our buses. How do we keep our workers safe? We've gone through a number of innovations in that space too. And then we go through and start looking at ventilation. And so all these things are really important. So if I have to be in a shared use car, those windows are down, right? Those windows are down. I have a mask on and making sure everybody else has a mask too. Make sure I don't touch surfaces, etc. And that's just taking risk factors out of the space. On our subways, we have an air exchange, fresh air exchange of 18 to 25 air exchanges per hour, which is like we didn't plan that, just we got lucky. And that's what we have, which is way, way above CDC requirements for indoor spaces in hospitals and operating rooms and stuff like that. So it's getting that information out to the customers, getting the customers armed with that information. How crowded is it? What's the mask compliance? What is the air exchange? What's your duration of time you should be on in the closed environment? Getting that information out is our obligation if we want people to pick back up transit, because otherwise it's just going to be those who need to use transit as opposed to choice riders.
Thanks, Mark. And Stefan, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to allow you to give comments because I'm over time, but I have one rapid fire question that I'm going to start with you, Stefan, and everyone has 15 seconds to answer. So will Smart City Work speed up or slow down because of COVID-19, and why? Stefan, you're first.
Clearly, it will speed up. We have to find new answers to new questions. So it will speed up, and I'm sure that within 2 years, we will have done more than maybe 5 or 10 years based on that. Okay,
Brian.
I would agree, speed up, especially in certain areas in which COVID's really affected. And I think, there's going to be more effort put into those areas, and I think it's going to speed up, and it needs to speed up.
Mark.
I'm going to take a contrarian view and say it's going to slow down for 2 reasons. One, our eye is off the ball. We have to take our resources and focus on the disease rather than on the people in terms of moving them, technology, et cetera. And most important, we have no money.
Thank you. Thank you all. Really appreciate all your great thoughts today about smart cities. I wish we had more time, but I need to end the session now. Thank you very much.